Hi, welcome to my Procreate demo for the piece I call The Gentleman. This here is the original sketch. I did this in Adobe Sketch, and as with all the previous videos, this is all done on an iPad Pro using an Apple Pencil. Now, I slowed this one down a whole lot more. I got a lot of requests to see everything a lot slower, so this is as slow as I can make it with what Procreate exports out. So with this one, I knew I sort of wanted this like backdrop, sort of this old-fashioned backdrop, so I started by blocking that in first. You can see here I just wanted it to be, the whole piece I wanted to be mostly brown. I wanted to have this sort of older look to it. Once I started blocking in the background, I realized that in order to start, seeing the shape, I needed to go ahead and block that in before I finished up some of those background details. So this is me just going in and blocking the whole thing in, and now I'm going back to the background and doing a few more details. Now I start blocking in the skin. I've got a lot of questions on my brushes. Currently, I'm not using any custom brushes in Procreate. I'm using all of the ones that they provide. In this one, I think I used the one that's labeled artistic. It's like the very first one. So just the basic stuff. You don't really need much more than that, at least not for what I'm doing right now. And I find that once I start using some of their fancier texture brushes, I actually run into some trouble and have to really knock them back or adjust them or whatever. So you see mostly standard brushes. So here I've got the skin blocked in, the hair blocked in, the eyebrows, the eyes, the mouth, and then I'm going in and painting in the various skin tones, or the layers of his skin tone. So right now I'm working on the nose. Right there you just saw, if you go back a little bit, you can see that I block in the shape for the front of the nose and then on a separate layer, and then I knock the opacity back and then flatten it into the main layer that I'm working with. I do that a lot in my pieces to try and control how much paint is getting laid down. It's a lot easier to do it with sort of a big heavy setting like that. Now here is the 5 o'clock shadow, which is just like a dark gray blue layer that is put across the entire skin, and then the opacity is lowered. Now I'm just going in and adding some extra highlights in the skin. Sometimes instead of just going through like a straightforward process, I may lay a couple of other things in because I want to see how they're going to play against something like a highlight. So I put that 5 o'clock shadow on first, then the highlights, then went in and did some blush, which is just pink that's been lowered in opacity, and then I put some darker on the eyes, which is like a super light, super desaturated purple set to multiply. That is then the opacity is adjusted. So then I went in and did the eyes really quick. They're really small, so I apologize if that's hard to see. Then I put a little dark gradient on the mouth, going from dark at the top to light at the bottom, and then start blocking in the teeth. After I blocked in the teeth, blocked in the gums over the teeth, and then I'm using the shape of the mouth to constantly erase away what's going on outside of the mouth so that it all stays contained. Now I'm painting in the details of the teeth. I usually find that after I've painted a good portion of the mouth, I then put sort of like a dark gradient emanating from the edges, not broadly the edges, but mostly where like the lip is casting over the teeth. So even though you see some hard details in there of where the lip might cast, then you'll find that towards the end of the mouth I put in just a darker gradient overall that's sort of this more ambient darkness casting that sort of drives a little bit of depth backwards into the mouth. Sometimes you'll see that big flash of color across the entire canvas. That's usually me having to like sort of work around the way Procreate does selections, at least as far as I've understood it so far. So if people know more, let me know. But sometimes it's hard to select what's the opposite of the shape that I'm trying to paint within. So what I'll do is I'll create a layer, I'll fill it completely, then I'll select the layer of, like, let's say the shape of the mouth, then I'll clear that from that bigger shape that fills the entire canvas, and then I'll use that selection, which is now the entire canvas besides the mouth, as my layer for clearing debris. So that's why you'll see those flashes of color all of a sudden. The way Procreate exports out the steps, that's basically me filling the canvas, erasing away what I don't need, and then using that fill as a new selection. So now I'm going through, now that I figured out the skin and I figured out the mouth, I'm going through and wrapping up the neck. That's me turning off all my layers so I can sample my colors again, going back in. I very quickly did the outfit because I knew that, I just sort of knew what it was going to be, and I didn't want all that much detail. I wanted all the detail in this piece to be in the face and the mouth specifically. And then the hair, once I get to the hair, I wanted that to have some detail, but I wanted that to be sort of haphazard. I didn't want it to be as controlled. Trying to get a little bit of contrast in the tight, clean control of the way like the mouth and the eyes and the nose look, and then contrast that with some of the messiness of like the background and the hair. I also want to do a really strong vignetted look, so there's a lot of black on the body, softly to just sort of vignette that. So here I am putting in a rim light on the distant side. I believe you'll see this like cycle through a bunch of random colors. What ended up happening was I wanted to soften the rim light. Sometimes I want to soften things because I feel like they might be a little bit too bold, and then I look at the piece later and I decide that that was a mistake and I go back in. So you might see that rim light die down at one point and then it'll come back strong. I actually finished this piece, texted it to a friend of mine just to be like, hey, check out what I just did, and then in texting it to him was like, oh, I should go back in and pop that out more. One thing that I had planned from the beginning on this piece was this black outline. When I worked on a game called Miniguns Assault, I did this for all the portraits in the game, and I thought that it'd be fun to sort of go back to it. So having like a nice rendered interior and then this hard black line on the outside, I just thought would be fun. So this is me going in and I'm adding in all of those black lines, trapping all the major shapes, and now I'm going through the hair. So I'm doing this by creating layers underneath the layers, that way I don't have to be quite as controlled. So I'm basically filling in black behind the hair, and that's what's creating that outer line. I'm exceeding it. In Photoshop I might, depending on my mood, do something where I'm actually duplicating the hair, making it black and then sort of shifting it around to do some of this a little bit quicker. But that's not always the best way to go, especially when you have so many curves, because you can get too much thick and thin. And on Procreate I have a little bit less control. I'm not used to it yet, so I knew that it'd be better to just do it by hand. So now I'm blocking in all the hair. This, I didn't use a custom brush, but I used one of the messier, more artistic brushes that is included in Procreate. Went through, did a bunch of just sort of noisy. I knew I wanted it to be like clouds. I wanted it to be really fluffy looking, but messy, and I wanted it to look like this guy has a hell of a time keeping his hair in order, basically. So got my base layer, the next layer up, and now this is the highest key before I'm going into a highlight layer. And so there's a combination, like most of the time when I'm painting here, of there being some brushes, some brush strokes, and then some erasing to try and knock everything back. So you'll see something maybe get laid down a little bit too detailed, and then you'll see it sort of knock back a little bit. Right there, in fact, if you go back and look at his right sideburn, you'll see that some black, or dark I should say, got filled in, and then I erased away again to sort of pull it back. So adding a little bit more dark spots to give it a little bit more volume here. And now I'm going in with the highlight, and this I believe is a brush set to add. It's like a bright yellow set to add. There's some overlay and some darkening, so that all goes by really quickly, but that's essentially a big soft fuzzy brush that I'm just sort of laying a highlight in, bright, then laying a dark in as a multiply, and now I'm going back through and actually tailoring that and erasing it away, and then adding in the extra black lines that I wanted there to be there to accent things. Then I started doing some crazy tweaking. That was just like a lot of desaturating and a little bit of adjustment, extra vignetting by adding that extra black towards the top so that all that light gets brought to the center of his face. And then now I'm putting in a rim light. I tried to do the rim light with another one of those artistic brushes to have it sort of match the texture of his hair a little bit. It worked out okay. So there, I know it flashes by really fast, I apologize. So I've decided to duplicate that video a couple times. You can watch it here as a second run through of me desaturating the hair, adding some textures, readjusting the rim light. Here it is one last time, moving the shadow, blurring it, lowering the opacity, and making some final adjustments, basically. So there it is. That's the piece that I call The Gentleman. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe. Thank you. If you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.